I recently dropped the world's first range test of the brand new Polestar 3 long range dual motor. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll link that video in the description box down below. That car performed extremely well. And also the video did very well, a lot of views and a lot of positive comments. But there were a few interesting and also negative comments about people with their anecdotes getting better range or close to that range, and also other YouTube channels getting more range in other electric cars that, the Polestar 3 actually didn't perform well. So in this video, I want to talk about that and the problem with range test here on YouTube. And then also, I recently went to the Audi Q6 World Media Press Drive in Spain and talked to another journalist who was very critical to my testing method, which completely surprised me. So I want to talk about that, the problem with range test of electric cars here on YouTube. On July 15th, we are doing a giveaway to celebrate 50,000 subscribers here on the channel. In collaboration with Zaptec and then partnering up with Polestar as Polestar's recommended home charger, we are giving away 2 Zaptec GO home chargers. To enter, simply subscribe to this channel and comment down below, "I want a Zaptec GO home charger." Thanks Zaptec for sponsoring this video. I'm probably going to shoot myself a little bit in the foot here, but I want to start this video criticizing you, the viewer, because every time I do a range test or a long trip test or whatever, I get some kind of results out of an electric car. There's always a comment or 2 or 3 about people getting a lot better range or a lot lower consumption in their car on their route till and from work. And though I don't think people are lying, for the most part, of course, this is the internet, there are trolls and people just make stuff up. I think the majority of those comments are actually genuine and people's experience. But the problem with that is an anecdote is people's experience. And the route you drive to work, the speed you drive, the amount of traffic, your altitude, your weather, are you going uphill or downhill, does affect the range a lot. And the most important thing is that when I do a range test and you drive wherever you drive, you cannot compare them. The results are completely uncomparable because of conditions, because of speeds. And even if they were comparable, you just writing that in a comment isn't going to give any validity to you or your comment. An anecdote at the end of the day is just a personal story, and unless you have, some independent evidence, a video, a document, an article, anything documenting your claim, nobody should actually believe it. And that goes for any anecdote, any story, any, comment on YouTube or in a newspaper or anywhere. We should be very critical to the source of information and the quality of the claim. And then we have the tests that are actually documented, like the videos I do here on the channel where I film them from start to finish. I show you guys the display. You can see me actually out and driving, and you can see the distance, the range, the time, the consumption, where we started with the battery percentage, where we stopped. Everything is documented. Even the tests I do here on the channel, which are documented, are never going to be 100% accurate. Tests other YouTube channels do or other magazines do are never going to be 100% accurate. They're always going to be an approximation, where there are always going to be variables that are impossible to control. So if I get 400 kilometers of range out of an electric car, I could go back the day after and maybe get a little bit of different results. So it's not going to be 100% accurate. So that's very important to remember. And that is because on different days and in different tests, we have different conditions, we have different weather, we have different wind speeds, wind directions. Maybe it's raining one day, the other day it's dry, maybe it's overcast, maybe it's sunny, maybe it's 10 degrees, maybe it's 30 degrees. All of these different conditions have a big effect on the results. And this is, the weakness, or rather the strength of electric cars. Because they are so efficient, because almost 90 to 95% of the energy you put into the car is actually used to propel it forward, the conditions, the temperature, the weather that day, the road surface is going to affect your range, your consumption in a lot bigger regard than with an internal combustion engine. Because in an internal combustion engine, if you're lucky, about 25 to maybe 30% of that energy you put into the vehicle is used to propel the car forward. So if there's a little bit more wind that day, you're not going to, notice the difference between using 30% or 32% of the gas, because almost all of it is wasted into heat and to sound. But with an electric car, because almost all of that energy is used to propel the car forward, if the wind is a little bit stronger that day, you're going to get different results. And this is why we have different test methods, which I'm going to get back into. But if you have a strong wind, even though you're doing ABA testing, we're starting one place, going to another place, and then going back to where you started, even though you're going to get a lot of that energy recuperated, say you have a strong headwind on your way, on the first section, you have that as a tailwind on the way back. You're not going to recuperate all of that energy, not 100% of that energy. So if you did a test where, there was strong winds versus no winds, the day with no winds, you're going to get a little bit better results. And then we have the big problem with these tests, and that is the difference in test methods. So I do my tests in a certain way. Kyle from Out of Spec Reviews does his test in a certain way. Tesla Björn does his test in a certain way. CarWow does his test in a certain way. Kris from Battery Life in Germany does his test in a certain way. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these test methods. You could criticize one test method for being more inaccurate than another, but the big issue with these is that they're different. You cannot compare my results with Kyle's results, for example. And the big reason for that is our test methods are very different. So first off, my tests are done starting at 120 kilometers an hour and ending at 120 kilometers an hour. And also because of there can be traffic, the cars, can be calibrated differently, because I drive according to the speed on the speedometer, because in my opinion, that's what people do in the real world. You don't have, GPS measuring device in your car. Most people don't have that. They just, set their cruise control speed on the motorway to maybe 10 above the speed limit or 5 above or at the speed limit, and that's the speed they drive. That's why I use the speedometer as reference. So I drive at that speed. I also drive at basically sea level. I do ABA testing on a very flat surface. But Kyle does it differently. He drives at 70 miles an hour, which is 112 kilometers an hour. He also lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, where instead of being at sea level, he's at about 1,500 meters. And also, when he comes down to 1%, he actually takes off the motorway and then he tries to drive the car until it's empty. And because of that, he's driving the car from 1% all the way till it's almost empty off the motorway at much lower average speeds than the rest of the test. You're not going to be able to compare his results with my results, because my results are done at 120 kilometers an hour on the speedometer. An actual measured speed, because I actually time my test, I divide the time by the distance to get the actual speed for that test. My measured speeds are between 112 and 116 kilometers an hour. And even that measured speed is higher than his indicated speed at 112 kilometers an hour. And then the fact that he exits the motorway and then he drives till the car is almost basically empty at lower speeds, his average speed is going to be lower than that again. So you're not going to be able to compare our results. And also the difference in elevation is going to play a big factor. So the takeaway at the end of the day is that you're not going to be able to compare my results with his or mine with CarWow or Nuff. Nuff is a different beast because they don't drive that much on the motorway, mostly on Norwegian country roads. And also they don't do ABA testing. I start at one point, I go to a different, and I go back to my point. For most of my tests, I have this exact same route. Yes, I have done the test in Western Norway and also abroad where I'm not able to do it on my route. So even those results are not going to be comparable to my usual results. And I say that in those videos, like, you have to take this with a grain of salt. It's only an approximation and it's not a one-to-one comparison. And when I say that with my own testing method, but on different routes, you can't take my test and compare them with other routes. Take the Nuff test, for example, which they get to this point where if you're able to get to this top of the hill or the mountain, you're going to get like 70 extra kilometers. So that means one car is going to just be shy of that hill, getting 320 kilometers or 350, whatever it is. And then the other car getting a kilometer extra is actually going to be able to get 70 kilometers extra because of the rest being downhill. Those results may seem very far apart, but in the real world, because of the difference in height and elevation, and they're not doing that ABA testing on a flat surface, the results are going to be non-comparable in between the vehicles, where I try to make my test as comparable as possible. So at the end of the day, I'm not criticizing any of the test methods. I'm not saying some are better than others, though some may actually be better than others. It's just important to know that the results from different tests cannot be compared with each other. It's good to know the test method for the test you're watching and the test you're referencing. And that's why I'm always honest, upfront about my test and when you can't compare them to my other tests when there are inaccuracies. But I see that my test, because of the speed, is so close in the different tests. Like if you take the average, just like plus minus a kilometer or two, my tests are actually within 1% or 2 accurate of what I think you're going to get under those conditions. But that is given that if you're going to compare two cars, you have to have them be about the same conditions, same weather, same, surfaces and stuff like that. Because the warmer it is, or the closer to 20 degrees Celsius, and the nicer the weather, and the lower the speed, the more range you're going to get out of an electric car. So I think for everybody, there is room for improvement. So I want to improve my test. Like, hopefully when my channel grows even more, I can get more help on the channel, and maybe I can do like 2 or 3 cars at the time on my test route, or I can try to do them at the same day if I have different cars, which I seldom do have. But there is a lot of room for improvement to make my tests more accurate. But I also think I can take the data I have, because I do test in winter and in summer. I test from 80 vehicles, and I also do my range test and long trip test where we do get different consumption. I think there are, mathematical models, maybe algorithms or just simple calculations where I can correct and I can extrapolate even more data. So if anybody of you are good at maths and can help me with that, my email is on my main page here on YouTube. So shoot me an email if you want to help me to make some models and make these tests more accurate, and maybe we can correct for differences in speed, maybe we can correct for differences in temperature and in weather, so we can have a chart where it's easier for the viewer to compare the results. I would really like that. I have no problems with, admitting that my test procedure isn't perfect and there is room for improvement, maybe even a lot of room for improvement. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please drop me a thumbs up down below. And for more car content, as always, please subscribe. See you guys later and goodbye.